بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, today we begin the station of Tahdhib, which perhaps can be translated as discipline. And when we kind of go over some of the elements here, you'll find similarities between this concept of discipline and the concept of being tested, fitna. But there is perhaps a primary difference between the two, in that a fitna is something that is imposed on us by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We really don't have a say in it. So it's not like we are pursuing a fitna and we're not seeking to be tested, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses when and how. Tahdhib, on the other hand, discipline, is being proactive in getting the results similar to what a fitna is meant to do. So the overall goals of these two concepts are the same, but the way it comes about differs. So the goal of a test is to purify and discipline the individual, remove certain practices, behaviors, habits that are harmful to the person's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that again comes about through imposed mechanisms or imposed events. Whereas tahdhib, we are trying to discipline the self by removing certain unhealthy habits in regards to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we are actively pursuing this. So Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh begins the station by saying, huwa sabq al-ubudiyya fi kir al-imtihan. It's as if we are putting our worship of Allah, our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the same place where a test puts us in, right? If that makes sense. So, the word fitna, we've discussed before that the word fitna was used classically to refer to a blacksmith when he puts certain elements, ores, items in intense heat to purify that element from foreign substances that devalues it or reduces its value, right? And the word that is used, for the mechanism that is used, is referred to as a kir in the Arabic language, that hot fire, that oven. And Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah is saying the same exact thing, right? You're putting your ubudiyya in kir, in this place of the imtihan, right? So you have the similar idea here, but again, the difference is in how it comes about. And the goal is ikhraj ma fiha min al-khabath wal-ghush, right? The goal here is to extract and to remove what is in the heart or in the person in terms of their habits or their beliefs, etc., from impurities, right? Impurities here being, things that are unhealthy in terms of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says, At-Tahdhib mihnatu arbab al-bidayat wa huwa shari'atun min shara'i' al-riyada. He says that tahdhib, discipline, is a tribulation for those who are in the beginning. So those who are beginning their pursuit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their journey to Allah, when they start to build that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this concept of tahdhib is discomforting. It's more of it's a type of suffering than it is an enjoyable task. So if you remember, several months or weeks ago, I mentioned that we were talking about one of the stations, and I could see in your faces kind of the feelings roaming in your heart when we were discussing these ideas. It might have been tawbah. And if you remember, I said that you see that feeling that you feel, how the heart hurts, right? Do you remember this? Yeah. That is the feeling of the heart purifying itself. And in the beginning, it's uncomfortable. Why? Because it's something new, right? The body isn't accustomed to it. So when a person begins to exercise, after not exercising for many years, right? How does the body feel? Absolutely terrible, right? But the more they exercise and the more committed they are to and consistent, you find that the body becomes more and more adjusted to it, to where It no longer bothers the individual. It's no longer discomfort. Rather, if the person doesn't exercise, that's when they feel uncomfortable. So it becomes the opposite. The same idea here. When we begin to discipline the self, spiritually speaking, right? You get this feeling in the heart where this hurts, right? This really hurts, and that is just the body, going through that soreness phase, stretching out its muscles after not, being used very much spiritually speaking over the past, however long. The first level really focuses on this. The earlier we are in our pursuit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more discomforting this idea of discipline is, and the concepts here. But the more you implement this, the more you feel comforted by it. وَهُوَ شَرِيعَةٌ مِّن شَرَائِعِ الرِّيَاضَةِ, and it is one of the ways of riyada, exercise. So if you remember the station of exercise, that our body needs exercise in order to stay healthy, our spirituality and our hearts need exercise in order to also remain and to be spiritually healthy. So this is one of the exercises that go under that underlining concept, right? So it is difficult in the beginning, but again, the more we are committed to this, the more consistent we are, the more we implement it, the easier it becomes, and the more accustomed we become to it, to where you feel healthier, you feel better after undergoing these practices. And if you don't undergo them, you feel something's off, something's wrong. So do be patient with it, and hopefully this kind of introduction allows us a little bit more patience when we deal with these ideas here, because we're all guilty of this, simply because, well, we're human beings, right? So وهو على 3 درجات. الدرجة الأولى تهذيب الخدمة، أن لا يخالجها جهالة ولا يشوبها عادة ولا يقف عندها همة. So the first level is we are disciplining our service. Okay, khidma, and really the terminology of Sufism and terminology of spirituality, khidma is referring to really ibadah, our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they call it khidma perhaps because you are doing a service for yourself and for all of humanity, really, because the more engaged a person is in spirituality, in these ideas of manners and practices, the more of a productive member of society they become. And at bare minimum, they abstain from harming other people. So you're doing a service for yourself and for the human community or humanity. It can also be referring to serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and using kind of this term where you are in service of the highest subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if someone were to come and say, I am a servant of the king, that might be viewed as an honorable position, right? A position people are envious of. Well, I wish I was serving the king. Why? Because the one you are serving is praiseworthy, or society views that individual as being of noble stature. So you are serving the one of noble stature, and that brings about a lot of nobility for the individual. So when we are doing service, we are serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah being the King of Kings, the highest, the most excellent, the most noble, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are bringing about an amount of nobility and honor for the self. So the first level is disciplining our services, and that is through doing 3 things. The first, right, or before that, the idea here is we are purifying our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are disciplining our worship of Allah by removing certain habits, certain practices that impede the pristineness, or that taint the pristineness of our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have 3 things that are mentioned here. The first one is by not mixing our service, our worship of Allah, with ignorance. Okay? Because whenever ignorance mixes with our worship, right, the person essentially puts their worship in a place it wasn't meant to be, channels their worship in a way it wasn't meant to be channeled, focuses their worship on something that isn't the end goal. Why? Because the person simply does not know what to do with this, right? Give a chicken a hammer, it's not going to do much with the hammer. Why? Because it doesn't know what the purpose of this hammer is. It recognizes this is something, right? It sees it, but it simply does not know what it's meant to be used for, right? And if we were kind of just imagine for a moment that a chicken can actually hold a hammer and use it, well, how exactly is it going to use it? It'll probably do more damage than good. A bad analogy here, but I hope the point got across. The idea is that if we truly want to build a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to understand it. We need to understand the goal. We need to understand the purpose of what we do. Where is it meant to take us? What is the end goal? What is the purpose of all of this? And unfortunately, in our times today, if we were to kind of assess the Muslim ummah, right, just from this lens, the lens of the station of discipline, right, the vast majority of Muslims would not know how to pass this very first element of the very first level. Why? Because in my own experience, right, and my experience is limited to my experience, right? Others can have different experiences, and I hope their experiences are, more optimistic than mine. But if you were to ask people, what is the purpose of Islam? What is the project of the Quran? What is it trying to do? You get very vague answers, such as, well, the Quran is meant to guide us. Okay, yes, right? But, what is it guiding us to? Well, the Quran is nur, it's light. Okay, a light shining on what? You get these very general answers that, although the Quran does use these words to describe the Quran, right? If we only understand it from this very general sense, right, it becomes very vague. And then, the shaitan can play his tricks and deceive individuals to thinking that Islam is meant to bring us, the purpose of all of this is this X, Y, or Z, when in reality it's not. And one of the common ways we see this today is in politics, right? That somehow, or for some reason, the purpose of Islam is actually political. And that Islam, the reason or the purpose of the Quran is to establish the khilafah, right? To establish a Muslim polity. And thus, they cater all verses of the Quran, all these concepts, to this goal. And anyone who politically opposes those individuals, right? They disagree with their political stances, is now seen as a heretic. Why? Because, well, this is the goal of Islam, and therefore you're going against Islam. And you'd be surprised at what some people say. So, for example, one person told me that Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam, right, became the king of Egypt. And I told the person, how? Where are you getting that information from? It's not in the Quran. The Quran only acknowledges that he became the Aziz, some minister or some position, a high position, but nonetheless a position within the government. He said, no, because Islam is meant to, rule all, or something along these lines. It's been a while, so I forgot exactly what he said, but something along these lines. And therefore, Yusuf could not have accepted that position except with the intention of becoming the king. And this is all nonsense. It's complete nonsense that fundamentally shifts the purpose of Islam, right? So this is very important in our times today. And people simply do not know. I hope this class knows. What is the goal, the project, the purpose of Islam? Come on, I know you know. Someone unmute themselves. Worship Allah alone. Thank you. Right? Tawheed. Because he is worthy of worship. Exactly, right? And the evidence for this is literally every single verse in the Quran. All of it is in the pursuit of teaching us who Allah is and how to worship Him. Right? Who Allah is, so that we know who we're worshiping. Because how can we worship someone or something we don't know who they are? Right? It just simply makes no sense. So the Quran in its entirety revolves around this. Worship Allah alone. Right? Anything besides that is meant to, right, endorse or to strengthen, support this. Right? So does Islam have something to say in terms of general political issues? Yes, we can use Quran and Hadith to have a conversation in political thought, of course. But is the goal of Islam, right, the primary goal of Islam, to create Muslim rule and for Muslims to rule above all? Or is the point of a government, because with a government people can, or a government takes care of its people, supposed to take care of its people, so that the people can find more time to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Look at all the prophets, from Adam alayhi salatu wasalam to the last and final messenger alayhi salatu wasalam. It's all about worshiping Allah alone. Everything else is meant to cater towards this goal. But if you don't have this, you don't know this, it becomes very random. Or if this is replaced with something else, you can see how it fundamentally changes everything in Islam. Right? So the first element of this first level is knowledge and seeking knowledge. Because how can we serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we don't understand what Allah wants from us? Or we don't understand, or we don't know how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more ignorant a person is, right, and the more practicing that ignorant person is, the more they go astray. And that is a simple, empirical fact. And scholars have warned about this from long time ago. Right? Be careful, be careful of worshiping Allah without knowledge. As you worship Allah, you need to increase your knowledge so that these tricks cannot be played on you by the shaitan or by misguided people. Right? So this is key in our times, and I hope over the past 3.5 years or so I've been with you that I've at least helped you make some progress in this regard. The second element of the first level is shawbul ada. This idea of habits, that when a person is practicing and implementing spiritual practices in their daily lives, it becomes very routine, and that routineness begins to erode the freshness of those acts of worship, and therefore what ends up happening, these acts of worship become stale, right? When a person becomes desensitized, or when a person routinely, goes to the masjid for salah, and they routinely do it. When they first start practicing this, it's very inspirational, it's very uplifting, it's refreshing. You can feel the iman kind of circulating in the body, in the mind, and the heart. But as time goes on, they become desensitized to these things. It becomes more of a routine where I'm just doing this because, I become accustomed to it. And therefore, the practice itself becomes stale, spiritually speaking. I don't mean they're not getting reward for it, but getting reward for doing something does not necessarily mean that their iman is also increasing, or at least increasing in a very profound way. It can be very, very slight, very nuanced, very minimal, right? So in order to discipline ourselves, we need to get over this very difficult challenge of things becoming routine instead of an act of worship. So a person can become, these things can become so routine in their lives that their intention changes without really realizing it, that the reason why they are doing these things is actually out of routine and not out of worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very extreme example, right? But nonetheless, it can happen, and we need to be aware of this. And this is why, muraqaba and muhasaba, these other stations that preceded tahdhib, they're so important because it keeps refreshing the intention. And if we're not doing that, and again, it's difficult for a person to be consistent and persistent in these practices, but nonetheless, they are necessary. A person can be doing a lot of acts of worship, but in reality, they're doing it out of routine, right? And they're not reaping the rewards and the benefits that that act of worship should be doing for the individual, or could be. And how can we test this, right? We can test this as follows. If, let's say a person routinely goes to Isha prayer every single day to go to Isha prayer. How can we test whether or not this is an act of worship out of submission of Allah, or it's just become a routine? We can test it in a very easy way, and that is the following. If that person were to be presented with an act of worship, an act that can bring him closer to Allah in a more profound and befitting and beloved way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the benefits of the second act of worship is greater than the first act of worship, right? So for example, a person goes to Isha prayer. They have an opportunity now to go and help someone take care of a big problem, right? But if they do that, they're going to miss Isha prayer in the masjid, right? And they're going to have to pray either alone or with that other person. Now, we can say very confidently that the second scenario, going to help someone out, take care of a problem that they are in, and praying with them, will bring a lot more reward and is a lot more pleasing to Allah than going to the masjid and praying, right? So we can confidently say that. Now, if these two options are presented to the individual, and again, they have a routine of going to the masjid, if they would rather go to the masjid and pray instead of helping that individual out, this is an evidence that the person is dependent on a routine and not pursuing the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because we have to ask the question, why did they choose the lesser of the two goods? If the person's goal is to please Allah, right? If the person's goal is the reward, increasing the ranks in paradise, then by default we are going to choose the one that's going to do that better for us, which is obviously the second scenario. So why did they choose the first one? Because they're so comfortable with their routine, they don't want to go out of it. And therefore, it's more about giving the self that comfort through the routine than it is about worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submitting to what pleases, doing what pleases Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Now, this is very nuanced and precise. So let us use this idea with the self and not with other people. In other words, use this as a scale to measure your own practices, not the practices of other people. Because it goes back to the heart, really, right? And only the individual knows why they made certain decisions. But be honest with the self. Why am I going and doing this? Is it a routine, or am I doing it seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And number 3, the third element of the first level is وقوف همته عند الخدمة وذلك علامة ضعفها وقصورها فإن العبد المحض إذا لا Right, so here what he's saying is to stop وقوف همته عند الخدمة, right, for the person's motivation to be limited to certain practices, certain acts, right? And what he means here is, by stopping or limited, what he means here is that they are pleased with what they are doing, right? They are content with their current practices, which then, being content with your status quo, right, means that there is no need to go beyond it or to look for something better. Right? So a person can fall into this, right? I am going to the masjid a few times a week, and I'm giving a little bit charity here and there, and alhamdulillah, that's good, right? What more can I do? What they do is they kind of stop themselves in their tracks, and they put these kind of limitations where, well, I'm here, and well, there's no need to go beyond that, right? And essentially, what this does is it's simply a sign of a person's weak motivations, that the motivations are weak and limited, right? They're blinkered, they're short, they're limited in their outlook, right? If His mercy and His bounties are infinite, then the amount of good that we can do is infinite as well. Of course, within the framework of the Sharia. And sometimes that can be through increasing the amount of practices and the worships that we do, or improving our spiritual state, our ikhlas, our intentions, etc. So a Muslim who understands Allah's bounties, the extent of His bounties and the extent of His mercy, notices that there are no limitations in what we can do or how close we can come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how much we can earn from that pursuit. Of course, there are limitations in what we can implement and how to implement these things, but in terms of the fruits that we can reap from that, it's endless because Allah's mercy and His bounties are limitless. And therefore, for us to be content with a particular status quo, right, is simply a sign of weak insight as to what Islam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can offer us. And we need to do more. Whereas someone who, spirituality, tawheed, is really surging in their heart, they realize that submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the end goal and the end all be all, and this is the highest pursuit, submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is no limit as in how much we can submit ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the simple example is, if we were to compare our submission to Allah with the Prophet's submission to Allah, right? I mean, there is simply no ratio or no fraction that we can really use to describe the difference there. So there's so much room for improving my submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so that's one way. Another thing is, if we realize that Allah's bounties are limitless and His mercy is limitless, and the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so vast, so wide, how can we be content with a particular level? And if the difference between two levels in paradise is the difference between the heavens and the earth, in terms of size and what's in it, right? How can we be content with what we have when there's so much more in the level right above us? If saying Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar increases our ranks in paradise, and such a huge difference, right? How can we ever be pleased with what we have right now? If you have a small home, right? You have a small home, imagine a shed, and it's run down, and it doesn't do much to protect you from rain and heat, etc. And right next door to you is a huge $50 million mansion that you have the keys for. Wouldn't we say that someone who's I'm okay with this shed, wouldn't we say that, well, where's your mind? We would attribute an amount of insanity to this person. You have access to that palace. Why not use it? Right? We have access to higher levels of paradise. How can we be pleased with something lesser? By access, I mean, the acts of worship that we can do in order to increase our ranks. So again, just kind of reiterate this level, which is very important, by the way. This is where we need to truly focus, because if we fall into any of these three, it can severely impede our iman, limit the amount of benefits that we are reaping from the acts that we are already doing. right? So we need to discipline our iman, our submission to Allah, our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by making sure we improve our knowledge, because ignorance misleads us. By refreshing the intentions behind our acts of worship so that they don't become routine, and by never being content with the level of iman that we have and our place in paradise, right? We always need to go for more, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq for that. الدرجة الثانية, the second level, تهذيب الحال, is disciplining our state, our spiritual state. وهو أن لا يجنح الحال إلى علم ولا يخضع لرسم ولا يلتفت إلى حظ. Hold on, let me just refresh my mind here. So, not يجنح الحال إلى علم, for our state of spirituality not to stray away from knowledge, right? That every state, or our state of iman, is always being bolstered by knowledge and never leaning away from knowledge, right? Or now I'm trying to let me look through the description here, or the explanation here, so that, because the way he words it is problematic in of itself, and it needs a little bit more explanation to kind of decipher what is accurate and what is inaccurate. So, leaning, our state of spirituality leaning to knowledge, right? It can be two types: praiseworthy and reprimanded. The praiseworthy is when our state of spirituality is always sourcing itself in knowledge and listening to knowledge and what knowledge of Islam is commanding, okay? And always testing and always, what's the word I'm looking for? تحكيمه عليه. Always judging our state of spirituality through knowledge and what knowledge is saying, right? So this is what we need. And Ibn Qayyim has a very beautiful statement here. He says that every state of spirituality that we have that is not corroborated by knowledge, right, then there is a fear that it is actually from the tricks of the shaitan and not from spirituality and Quran and Sunnah. So this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier in the beginning of this station, that when a person is unaware, unknowledgeable of Islam, right, they simply do not know how to apply it, when to apply it, and what is the goal behind this. And it leaves a void. And that void is often exploited by the shaitan. And the shaitan begins to inspire this individual in ways, or mislead the individual to think that this spiritual state is something that is bringing them closer to Allah, but in reality it's bringing them away from Allah, or taking them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is very scary. And Ibn Qayyim says, يخاف عليه. We fear that this person is in such a situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَمَنْ زُيِّنَ لَهُ سُوءُ عَمَلِهِ فَرَآهُ حَسَنًا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُضِلُّ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Some people, their actions are beautified to their self, thinking that it is guidance and it is correct, when in reality it's the exact opposite. Some people think that they are doing good when in reality they're doing bad. And therefore we need an external mechanism that can determine for us what is right and what is wrong. An external mechanism that is unbiased and does not have baggage with it. And that can only be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His messengers. Right? Therefore, when we judge ourselves and we judge the practices of other Muslims, right, it needs to be through the lens of قال Allah and قال الرسول. Allah said and the Messenger said, because they are the only ones who are free of baggage and biases and inaccuracies. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ enjoyed that because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching him and protecting him from that. right? So it's so important that our state of spirituality is always being critiqued by Islamic knowledge, or else we can be on a path thinking that it's bringing us closer to Allah, when in reality it's taking us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me see. And Al-Junayd rahimahullah ta'ala says that all the paths are closed. All the paths are closed, meaning all the paths to Allah are closed except that which is in agreement with the Prophet ﷺ. Right? In other words, someone who says, I want to worship Allah, I love Him so much, and I'm going to express my love and my loyalty to Allah by dancing. Right? Guess what? It's not accepted. Why? Because that's not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger told us to do it. So those who are pursuing Allah need the sincerity element, and here it's saying you need the submission element, submitting to Allah. We worship Allah the way He told us to, because that is submission, and we've gone over this before. And Al-Junayd also says, whoever doesn't memorize the Quran, and perhaps here hifth doesn't necessarily mean memorize, but rather those who don't preserve the meanings of the Quran and the implementation of the Quran, and those who don't write hadith, meaning that they're not experienced in hadith, لا يقتدى به في طريقنا هذا. They are not to be followed in our path, because our path and our knowledge is restricted by the Quran and the Sunnah. In other words, it is the Quran and the Sunnah that define our path. And therefore, someone who does not know Quran, does not know Sunnah, Hadith, how are we going to follow them when they don't know the path? Does that make sense? This is a very, very profound statement. وَقَالَ عِلْمُنَا هَذَا مُشَيَّدٌ, and similarly, just a repetition here. وَعَلَمْ أَنَّ الْمَعْرِفَةَ الصَّحِيحَ هُوَ رُوحُ الْعِلْمِ وَالْحَالِ صَحِيحَ. And Ibn Qayyim goes through a bunch of statements kind of critiquing certain Sufi practices that are void of knowledge and void of this meaning. And one of the things he says is that true knowledge, right? True knowledge, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the soul of knowledge, right? And what that means is you cannot know Allah without knowledge. And if the goal is to worship Allah, right, then we need knowledge by default. We cannot worship Allah if we do not know Him. And the only way to know Him is through knowledge. And therefore, people who don't have knowledge don't know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't know what He needs, or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah needs nothing, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requests from us. And a healthy state of spirituality, of iman, right, is the soul of disciplined and righteous acts. So our acts of worship cannot be healthy unless the soul, the spirituality driving our actions is also healthy as well. Right? فكل حال لا يكون نتيجته العمل المستقيم مطابقا للعلم فهو بمنزلة الروح الخبيثة الفاجرة. So every state of spirituality that does not result in righteousness in our actions and applying knowledge, then that soul is tainted and corrupted. Okay. Now, very harsh words here, but again, use it in a state of spirituality and not in terms of judging other people and their behaviors and their characteristics. This is meant to first and foremost be used as a judgment of ourselves. Now, if there are some scholars who are kind of have the insight in this and the experience in life to use this information beyond the self, then that's something that they can do to advise other people. Okay, so disciplining our spiritual state and purifying it is by answering the call. is answering the call of knowledge. ولا يلزم من هذا إعراضه عن العلم. Let's skip that statement. Okay, then so that's the first element. Make sense? Okay. The second element of this level is ولا يخضع لرسم أي لا يستولي على قلبه شيء من الكائنات بحيث يخضع له قلبه. So not submitting to anything besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, what this element of this second level is teaching us or advising us is to free the heart from being influenced by other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, of course, it's impossible to fully free ourselves from this. Likewise, there are certain influences that are permissible, okay? But in general, the idea here is that in order to discipline ourselves, our iman, our worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to, as much as possible, exclude other elements that might influence our behaviors and our decisions. Right? Why? Because if something is influential to us, then our heart will submit to it, depending on how influential that person or that thing is to the individual. So this right here is Islam's form of freedom. They say freedom of this, freedom of that. Islam's idea of freedom far excels modern Western notions of freedom, because although what freedom in the West means is you are free from coercion, from the government coercing you. But in reality, when you look at how advertising works, how education works, how a lot of government and non-government departments work, it really heavily focuses on capturing and enslaving the heart and the mind. To where, as one individual says about advertising in America has become so effective and powerful that they no longer need to convince you that their product is something you need. Rather, they work towards your consent so that you feel that you need this product without me having to tell you, or the advertiser having to tell you that you need the product or the product is good for you. Right? That's how effective it's become. Islam comes and says through Allah, all of this becomes so irrelevant to the individual, so uninfluential. Their decisions, their behaviors are 100% impacted and influenced and driven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who needs nothing from you, the one who gives you and does not take from you, unless taking from you is to give you something else, right? Or is in your benefit. So disciplining the self requires us to work towards breaking the chains of influence of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is freedom. And if you truly want to feel free, work towards this. Because wallahi, there is nothing more inspirational, more relaxing to the heart and the mind, more serene, tranquil, peaceful to the heart and mind than to free the heart, right, from being influenced by other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that. He can break those chains. وَلَا يَلْتَفِتْ, the third element here, وَلَا يَلْتَفِتْ إِلَى حظٍ. So here what he's saying is that if we accomplish something spiritually speaking, Allah, we are hopeful of reward for doing actions. That is great, but we should not turn, and we should not be, what's the word I'm looking for here? We should not be so focused on the fruits of our actions, not because that in of itself is bad, but rather out of worry that it might deter us from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or I'm sorry, let me say that. Not out of concern, not out of fear, or not because enjoying and being optimistic and hopeful in reward of Allah is in of itself bad, but rather out of concern and out of fear that that person might become content and pleased with their actions. we always want to keep the heart in a state of, wanting more. And although, I am hopeful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward us, or me or you, for these particular actions, right? If I become so absorbed by that, I might overlook other possibilities and other opportunities, right? I might become content. And another way to look at it is that if I am pleased with by focusing on the reward of my action, I might become pleased with the quality of my action in of itself. And that in of itself is problematic for the state of spirituality, right? And we discussed this before. So again, the idea here is not to create an amount of pessimism and kind of hopelessness where whatever I do is never good enough and whatever I do is not reward worthy. That's not the case here, but rather, instead of focusing on that, right, focus on the more. Yes, this is in my bank account. I'm not going to look at my bank account. Rather, I'm going to look for other investments. Kind of put it in, modern terminology here. Right? Does that make sense? Right? Okay. So, how much time have we been going for? There's one more level. Do I have time to continue this? Let's go ahead and stop here. I don't want to rush anything, although there's a little bit left. I have a lot maybe to say here. But let's go ahead and let's not rush. Let's go ahead and stop here. Inshallah, we'll complete the station next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And then afterwards, there's the station of al-istiqama, is uprightness or straightforwardness. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.